All right, cool. I think we're all here. Okay. This is Andrew.
Hello.
Hey guys.
And I guess you have been in this home and in this studio. I saw it a little bit more raw
Oh yeah.
when I first came here.
Yeah.
And then the development of, this is the world of more gear. Can't have enough gear sometimes. But you have a certain economy about that, and I sort of respect that. And what Andrew is able to do in a lot of cross genres is produce and make all kinds of music, because that's who he is, and that the scope is wide, the scope is broad, and he's quite knowledgeable. But we're going to hang out, we're going to talk, listen. I have no direction per se, but I know, we're going to find out some things. So let's start, like, where and when were you born?
Okay. I'm old now by your standards. Young by Ron's though. So I was born in Nashville in '86, and that's just enough. That was just right at the time to grow up for the neo-traditionalist, like, country music boom of the '90s. So, and I'm from a music business family, so I grew up in, like, going to studios and, like, at a lot of shows and stuff. So I was able to be, like, in a country music business family at the time that, like, country music was, like, really blowing up in a way that it hadn't before then, and was just able to see, like, a huge variety of, like, recording sessions and showcases and all sorts of gigs, which we can totally get into at some point. But yeah.
Well, then I understand the environment.
Yeah.
So now you're a young boy. How were you actually introduced to, let's say, your first instrument, or what do you remember some of the early listening in your home?
Well, I got a guitar when I was 4, and because that's just, like, it has both sides of my mom's family and my dad's family all played music. Like, my dad's family was more like everyone was, like, either in publishing or songwriting, or my grandfather was, like, an artist, so there were just guitars around. And then my mom's family, nobody did it for a living, but everyone, like, played gospel and bluegrass music. So again, just things were around. We listened to, my mom listened to a lot of the typical 80s, 90s pop stuff, whatever was top 40. Big Huey Lewis fan, which is a great band. If you guys haven't, I don't know where you sit on, like, Huey Lewis in the news, but that needs to have a reclamation project, because they're great. Just great. But yeah, we just, a lot of top 40 stuff, but then whenever I was about 6 or 7, we moved away from Nashville, and my sister and I were homeschooled for several years, so we kind of, like, removed ourselves from society in a lot of ways. So it was just kind of like everything just kind of landed in stasis. Like, you and I have had conversations, and I've made several references to Hoagie Carmichael tunes, and I'm sure you've walked away going, that's before my time.
Yeah.
Why does he know that? Because I watched a lot of, like, my stepdad was older, so, like, watched a lot of black and white movies, a lot of weird, like, early post-bop jazz stuff, but then the strange Bay Area mid-60s experimental stuff, where it's like, whether that be, like, your Iron Butterfly, or, like, Pharoah Sanders, depending on which end of the spectrum you're going. And just, it's a lot of traditional pop stuff, American songbook stuff, and I remember, like, all the stuff that my friends, everybody my age that came up in the 90s and, like, early aughts, I guess, seemed like everybody was, like, really into, like, U2 at one point.
Yeah.
And I just remember listening to it going, yeah, I get it, but it does nothing for me. And I think it was mostly because I was listening to the stuff you were listening to when you were a kid, where it's just kind of like, by the time you got there, it's like, I turned on a delay pedal, that's fine, yeah.
So here you have a guitar, you're young. let's say pre-lessons, were you trying to figure out how to play it before anyone showed you how to play it?
Yeah, because I mean,
You know, like
I wasn't. Yeah, I didn't really take lessons until I was in high school, and but like, you know, you're around a family of people that all play music, so it's like, oh, here's a G chord, okay, and then like
right.
you know play that over and over and over for 6 months until someone teaches you, oh, here's an A minor chord, and then that's the whole minor chord. Well, that's a whole game changer. Now you have two, and then it's just, you know, just kind of
build on
snowballs
that.
from there. And then you start buying. I grew up in the time of like magazines where you would have like, you know, tablature and like songs, transcriptions in the back of it. You know, whether that was like a guitar magazine or like Jazz Times or whatever.
So you
it
would
was.
just look at those fingers.
Yeah, just look at it and try to figure it out, and then
Yeah.
ask my music major stepfather, like, you know, play a chord. And is this a G sus2? And get confronted with like, well, let's break down what that means, and here's the theory, and then I would just leave. You know,
So do you think that,
it
so
would
do
be
you-
impatient.
So do you think that kind of organic nature of like working this out yourself versus the first more formalized
Mm-hmm.
thing, was that a positive or a negative effect, or how do you see that?
Depends on the day.
Yeah.
like I like being able to figure stuff out. Like you know, it's like I think because I wasn't around a lot of formal lessons, and I wasn't around a lot of people just where I could just ask questions, or, you know, I think one of the things about growing up around the Nashville music scene, especially at that time, it was not necessarily cutthroat, but it was just like whenever I started working there, it was, well, you want to do the best job you can, and you always want to know what you're doing, because if someone thinks you don't know, you don't have a job the next day. And because of that, I did learn. I always kind of had to figure stuff out on my own, and like always had to be like, oh, well, I don't want to seem like an idiot, so I don't want to ask any questions, which is objectively bad for your mental health and mostly bullshit. But so I think there are some aspects of like that mentality where I'm like, yeah, that's fine. I can figure out how to do stuff. I figured out how to mix records mostly on my own. I have a few friends that I would talk to, but it's like there's a wealth of information out there. Great. But then there's also parts of it where you're just kind of like, well, having friends is cool, you know, and like being able to talk to people and ask things and bounce ideas off of people is kind of cool, and that, you know, grass is greener kind of thing. So
Well, it's kind of interesting because all the really handy people that I know that can do things, their early childhood is like no one was going to fix the toaster.
yeah.
So they took it apart and
Yeah.
sort of put it together. I mean, that would be a simple example. And I never had that opportunity, so I didn't start to develop those skills. But I think what I'm hearing, and of course what I know about you, is that you're not afraid to sort of dig into the world of unknown, and I don't know how this works.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to figure this out. And what often happens, and you may or may not agree with me, you start to create your own personal identity. You actually start to develop a true thumbprint. That's your sound, that's your look. You know, that's how you're going to sort of create something that's going to come out of speakers, because on that journey of fixing the toaster, you discovered something kind of cool.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, that's one of the synth sounds or drum beats,
Right.
you know, on your track. Is that?
Well, I think so, and I think a lot of it's just the mentality of like, if you're like trying to fix something that's already broken, it's like, well, if it's already broken, are you gonna break it more? Like if your toaster doesn't function,
Yeah.
and you get a screwdriver out and you like try to figure out what's wrong with it, it's already broken and it doesn't work. So like, what are you gonna do? It's not gonna you're not gonna make it worse. And it's like that. I've found that with like, even with like mixing tunes or like trying to find sounds or whatever. Always save as before you start messing with it, right? And then if you're like, oh, I like but if you start messing with stuff, it's like, well, you can just hit undo, you know?
Right.
It's like, or if you're just like, oh, that didn't work, that sounds like trash, you just start over, it's fine. It's not gonna...
Yeah, and of course, as one of our exam questions, you can learn from your mistakes.
Yeah.
And again, sometimes the greatest mistake is your best opportunity. So I guess, you know, in an arching theme here is going for it because you can undo, or even if you can't. I remember seeing a movie of the painter Picasso.
Oh, yeah.
And he has a piece of glass and he paints a painting, and the painting is killing beautiful. It's like, oh my God, don't touch this, this is beautiful. And then he just picks up paint, paints right over that painting. And then that's perfect. Then he paints over that painting. And what he's really kind of trying to demonstrate that he's not invested. He's not going to get that invested because he can always make another painting. And because he is Picasso. You know,
yeah, well,
it
it's
like that.
This is the phrase "no sacred cows." It's like, I love that. It's just because it's like, it doesn't matter. It's like, I mean, you know, as you might want to, like, I don't know, you guys are all doing, like, you know, music business or something like that. It's just like, man, there's so many songs that get released every single day that it's just like, in the grand scheme of things, whatever you're working on statistically, no one's going to hear, you know, or no one's going to care about in a real way. There will be some people that might be like, oh, this is the best piece of music I've ever heard, and that's why we love our moms. But but like, you just have to think, even, you know, don't think about it like nihilistically, but it's just like, if you fuck it up, it's fine. Like, no one's gonna come after you. You know, like, especially now, like when you're like, before you get into like last night, we got home pretty late from being out of town, and I was like sitting at the couch, and I was like, oh, well, I got some stuff I gotta do tomorrow. I'm gonna mix some tunes, and I was just kind of going over the list, and I was like, oh, I have to get the music and vocal cleanups done for a podcast that drops at midnight tonight. It's like, then you have like when you have deadlines, you have, but like until then, you know, it's just music, it's just stuff, it's a thing. It's like, you can't really keep anything, like, there can't be anything sacred, because it's like, you might think this, you know, piano sound or like this riff that you're doing is the most amazing thing in the world, and if someone hears it and goes, oh yeah, no, I know that song, and because you've had that stuck in your head, you can't like let that break your spirit. You just have to be like, oh, okay, well, I clearly have subconsciously ripped off this other song, and okay, so let's throw that out and let's start over, and, you know, whatever.
So yeah. Would you say that guitar being placed into your hand is where you're the most comfortable these days, or because you play many kinds of guitars, many styles of guitars, bass guitar, drums, you know, produces, sings harmony?
I don't know. I think, like, yeah, my default is like, if I had to, like, if the studio caught fire and I had to grab like one thing, it's like, yeah, it's probably a guitar.
Right.
But I don't know. It's just, I think it's just now. It's like, yeah, if you just give me an instrument, I'll be okay. I'll be happy. But yeah. So yeah, I think probably guitar I'm still more comfortable with than anything. I can get more. I've just been playing it. It's like an extension of my body at this point. So. Yeah.
And then let's say bass guitar or drums. Was that a moment of need, or you just said, you know, I want to, you just sat down at a kit and you started to work things out, or did you take lessons, or
no,
how did that happen?
So, a lot of that, well, like bass, I'd always kind of like been able to, like, when I was, oh, hey, nice. Come on in. With bass, you know, when I was living in Nashville and like playing downtown, doing like all the cover gigs and honky tonk stuff, you know, it would be 4-hour gigs and there'd be no breaks. Yeah. So we would do just like 4 hours straight. And so you'd figure out a way to be like, okay, if I play acoustic guitar and sing for one song, then the singer can go pee. And then he comes back, and then he comes back, and then I can go pee, and he'll do a couple of acoustics. Everybody can go get a bathroom break, or go grab coffee, or grab a drink, or something. And then, so that extends to like, oh, but if I figure out how to play bass, then I can give the bass player a break or whatever, and then we all kind of rotate off. And so just like over time, it's just kind of like, yeah, you just learn it, and then then you have enough people be like, oh, that's not really the right way to play bass, you know, or whatever. And you just learn things. But that was just kind of organic. And then the drums thing, that honestly started like right at the height of the pandemic. I was working on at my old place. A friend of mine was like, hey, will you help me? Like, we're just, you know, doing the remote recording thing back and forth. And we were working on one tune for this organization in Spain. And I just like put banjo on like one song for him. And then I mixed it and was like, oh, that's cool. And then after a certain point, he's like, oh, well, you want to just try out this other song? And then I was like, so we ended up making an entire record, like where I played all the instruments and he just did vocals and some acoustic guitar. And then at some point it was like, oh, this really needs drums. And I was like, well, I have a drum kit. Don't know how to play it. But, you know, this is April of 2020 and it's like, not going anywhere for a while, so I'll figure it out. And so I tracked it, like set up a bunch of mics at the house, and which like the old studio, my old place is like, I didn't intend on having a band in there, or like having drums or anything, so it was about half this size.
Yeah.
So I set the drums up and like where like the drum throne you're sitting on was also my desk chair, so I would just like it would be set up to where I could just turn around and be at the drum kit and like go back and forth. And so I had that set up, and then like after I was like, oh, I think this is okay, did it for a couple of days, worked on it, and I sent the track to him, and he was like, oh man, drums sound great, what program do you use? And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Well, if I fooled him, that's, you know, that's good. So and then now I've got three kits in here now. So
Yeah.
just kind of like, but I mean, a lot of that's like, you know, it's for other people coming in and stuff. But,
So maybe partly due to the nature of the music that you're attracted to, that you play, and as I said, it's a pretty diverse palette. I know what you do. Without like high volume formal training, you have found your way to play all the instruments that you play in the exact manner you do it, and that will in effect replicate the cat that's been studying for a while.
Sure.
You know, which is sort of interesting. You know, I mean, I've taken a lot. I've taken too many formal lessons myself, but there is something to be. And that's how I learned jazz. I decided not to study jazz.
Yeah.
I said no. I'm going to back off of that, and I'm going to do a lot of listening, and I'm going to replicate some of the things that I'm hearing.
I think the main thing is just like it's not for me, like learning an instrument, like learning piano or something like that. Like it's like a lot of the stuff, just like when I was learning songs for cover gigs or whatever, it's like, oh, I have to learn this for this gig. So I'm kind of under a deadline, I'm kind of under pressure or whatever. It's just like, you know, and I always like giving myself deadlines for things. Where like my first gig I played drums on was at this little bar here in town with a buddy of mine who had put out this EP, and he's like one of the drummers that plays in like 12 bands in town. And I was like, hey, next time you do solo gig, let me know. I'll play drums, and that way you can set up front and sing, so that way you don't have to sing from the drum kit. And he was like, oh, that'd be great. And then he sent me his tunes, and we were like starting to get ready for rehearsal, and I was like, this was a horrible mistake. What have I done? You know, I was like, it was just like, you know, it was very nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things like, yeah, I don't know. I would never call myself a drummer. I would never call myself a piano player or, you know, a synth player or whatever it is. But I know how to practice and I know how to listen, and so it's like, oh, okay, it's just deconstruction at a certain point. Well, it's the same thing. It's like listening to it. It's like same with like production stuff or whatever. It's just like I can listen to a track and like whenever the drums kick in, and be like, oh, okay, yeah, I basically can tell you like what mics they're using. Right. You know, now it's not because I'm like, you know, it has nothing to do with like, you know, any sort of like gift or whatever. It's just like I've been doing it for long enough that I can kind of like listen to the aggregate and then separate the parts and be like, okay, so if we start here, like they're probably using this mic on a kick drum.
Right.
Or whatever.
Yeah, but wouldn't you? I mean, it beckons to something we were talking about. I teach this course in a really roundabout way.
Yeah.
But about being conscious in the depths of consciousness and what you can hear. So, like for example, I think you were all talking and talking with each other, and I was picking up. I just decided to just open everything. All of a sudden, I heard, almost like chickens, like you have in the back. I just heard like all these little things about the conversations that were happening between two at a time, and I just took it in just the way I would be listening to a symphony.
Yeah.
You know, there's the violas over there, and I hear all this, and really what you're speaking to is, as you are open and desire, essentially, to hear what's inside of music, besides like that's the drummer playing and that's the guitar playing, but what Mike is on a kick drum is kind of where you want to be leaning to. I mean, especially with the richness of layers of synthesized sound. You know, is that one track?
Yeah.
You know, or is that like 4 tracks?
Well, I think too, it just goes to like the bigger. For me, it's just like it's a bigger picture, and then it's like deconstruction for like production process. But it's like it's the songwriting, it's like the lyrics or whatever. I can't. My wife could probably tell you how many times we've been in a car on a trip or something, or just listening to the radio, and like some song by some artist that I could name, but I won't, will come on, and I would just be like, couldn't have done like one more draft, like what, you know, whatever, like it's like, you know, it's like that's the best line we came up with, like all the money in the world to make this record, and we're just like, so, let's not worry about the lyrics, guys, or you know, or the, you know, whatever tracks or whatever it is, but it's like it's being able to, for me, it's always been able to like listen to the whole of a composition, but then like you're saying, like with the symphony, it's like, man, if you focus on your second violins over here, that's, you know, that's a whole other thing than listening to the violas or listening to the basses or whatever. Obviously, I'm pointing, facing the stage.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a cellist.
The cello, yeah. But it's, I think it's just like the tricky thing, and what ruins a lot of like going to dinners for me is that if the restaurant's playing music, I can't turn it off.
Yeah.
like my wife can just tune stuff out like that, and I'm just like I would love to not be able to tell you what bar of the chorus we're on right now. Is that song that's barely playing in the background?
Yeah.
I can't turn that off.
Yeah.
And that is incredibly frustrating, and it leads to me like driving around in silence a lot of the time.
So I mean, obviously we're hearing this very interesting and eclectic way of you coming into the world and you getting introduced to the guitar, and then by need finding a bass and finding some drums. Do you think you can consciously find your way to those things? In other words, you did it in a very organic kind of way, but what if someone wants to sort of just, how do you hear all this?
I think the desire to hear it it's gotta start there. You've gotta want to, and you've gotta want to be like, I don't know, it's like there's an artist I'm working with in town here, this young artist, and we were getting ready to record a song of hers, and she played this track for me, and she was like, oh, I really like the guitar sound in this. And I was like, which one? And she was like, no, the guitar. And I was like, there are 3. And like, and it was just because, number one, well, for one, I have like really expensive speakers that are very, very detailed. But also, it's just like my ears are trained to be like, yeah, there's the thing here, but then there's the 2 things underneath here, like that are like buried in the mix.
Yeah.
And I realized, like, oh, you're talking about the primary sound. That's what you're focusing on, because that's what the mixer was focused on, or whatever. But like, there are these little, you know, these layers. But like, you don't get there immediately. But there is like this moment, like, I'm hoping that at least some of you have had this moment where you're like, there's the day before you can start hearing individual instruments on a song, and then there's the day after where you're just like, well, this changes everything. I don't know how to go. I can't go back, you know, whatever. And it's a really weird thing. But then it's like, then there's the extra level to that when you start like really focusing on like mixing a tune or something like that, and hearing certain effects that are put on things. And I'm not talking about like, you know, modulation or like delay or whatever. We can all hear like a big gated reverb sound or something like that. But when like when a song hits really big in a bridge, and then you start hearing the limiter that they've got at the end of the master bus like kicking in because they're just like, no, it's too loud, it's peaking, we need to push everything, and then you start hearing these competing frequencies, and it's like in a very musical way. But like, you know, that was a couple years ago where I like started really focusing on that stuff, and that's a whole other like, okay, well that changes everything yet again. It just took me, you know, 15 years to get there from the first one. So
well, I mean, the key word I heard, because I can identify it, is desire.
Yeah, that's,
you know, because if you want something pretty bad, you want to be able to play your instrument a certain way, or sing a certain way, or have a production go a certain way. You wake up kind of like immediately thinking about it in the morning, like that's what's on your mind a little bit. Or I always have music going on, and I time it so that I will fall asleep and the music will keep going probably another 30 minutes. You know, I want to listen to a particular. I want certain tunes and certain players of certain generations to be so inside of me that I want to, even when I'm sleeping. You see, and because there's such a desire, when I wake up and I kind of want to blow that a little bit, it's pretty much ready to go. The gun is loaded, and I think that's what you're also speaking to.
Yeah, so there's a similar thing. It's just like I've been doing the last couple of years. I've been like breaking down. Just I'll get my wife to send me like a list of songs that she likes, because the music she likes I don't understand. And,
what is this genre? If you could say.
I mean, it's all over. It's all over the map. But she's a little bit older than I am, so she's like, she's really big into like 80s pop music, and like that is like a big black hole in my brain of like understanding music. I do not understand any of that stuff, like the overly produced like sounds and stuff. It's not a thing I know. But what I've been doing is just like as like an experiment and just like as an exercise, it's just like, okay, well, listen to that track and then like, how can I break down all the parts? And then I'll just go through like, you know, whether it's like, I don't know, there's like a Berlin song or something like that, or like a Fine Young Cannibals tune, where it's like, I was just like, oh, I'm just gonna record the whole thing, like vocals, everything all the way down, and you know, not to play for people or not to like have it as a, you know, like, oh, I'm gonna showcase this. But as just as an exercise to figure out all of those parts and figure out how those productions go together, and then, you know, mix those in to like make them sound maybe not exactly the same, because like I'm not going to be using the same drum machines necessarily or the exact same instruments, but like make sure all the parts are there. There's that story, apocryphal or not, of like Hunter Thompson typing all the words to like a Hemingway book, I guess, probably Sun Also Rises or something, you know, just typing it, just like copying it, you know, word for word, not because he was like, I'm gonna make people think that I wrote this, but more of just like so he could get that inside of his, you know, bloodstream.
Right, exactly.
Whether that works or not, I don't know. The jury's out.
So, would you, back in the early days, let's say before you so-called produced anything, how did you find yourself, let's say beginning just recording yourself, how did you find your way into the very early stages of you being a producer? Was it to you producing yourself, or?
Well,
how'd that happen?
so growing up and working in Nashville, whenever I started doing, like I did a lot of sessions as a guitar player for a lot of different artists and bands, and a lot of those would be like, you know, quick demo sessions where it would be like, you know, we've got a 3-hour union session block, we're gonna try and get 5 songs done. And it would be like, so it'd be like a full band, you'd have like drums, keys, acoustic, electric, bass, and then you'd have a vocalist in the booth and everything, and everybody would play all at the same time. You get a chart, And you get maybe 2 takes, and then you have to do like quick overdubs because you're getting about 40 minutes per song. And we do like between the budgets for those are about $1,000 a song. So the publishing company wants to get in as much as possible. You know, that it's just, you know, it's always saving money. But so what happens is you in a session like that, you can't have someone at the desk directing everything and really thinking about what's the best way to evoke this emotion, because we don't have time for that. So you have to assemble the session leader when he books the musicians for that session, assembles personalities that are going to mesh well together and are going to think similarly and going to be like, so we get a typical Nashville recording session at that time anyway. It wouldn't be like one person telling everyone what to do. Like if you ever read those stories about like Phil Spector or something like that, or like Brian Wilson being like, okay, you play this part and you play this part. That's not what it is when you're doing like this kind of a session. So you listen to an acoustic work tape. They'll play that over the headphones. Everyone's reading the chart along with it, making notes for, you know, what they might want to do. Everybody, engineer, producer goes, cool, everybody got it? Yeah, everybody got it. 1, 2, 3, play the song down. If you screw up halfway in, if everybody screws up halfway in, start over, get it down. But you're literally going to get maybe 2 takes, and it's going to have to be like, okay, and you're going to have to be on. The thing about that is, it makes your brain work really fast, and you have to think about like, how can I make the parts I'm playing like pop sensible, everything working, and again, you have to listen to everything else that's going on, because if you're playing something that's going to clash with the piano player, we don't have time to work that out. We have to do it now. So if you have a break or you're going to do a second take, you get on the talk back. John, what are you playing? You know, 4th bar of the 2nd chorus. Okay, you're playing this chord. I'm going to make sure I don't play that note, whatever. But you have to think about an aggregate. So like I'm 19, 20, doing stuff like that 3 or 4 days a week. Even when you're not the producer on a session like that, you're already producing. Or a friend of mine who's a great mix engineer was like, doesn't matter what role you're playing on a song, you're always mixing, right? So you're always like building something bigger than the sum of its parts. So your brain's already thinking like, oh hey, if you're playing this bass line and I play a harmony guitar part over the top of it, that'll be cool because it's going to be a counterpoint to what the kick pattern's doing at that point, which is going to support the vocal line and give the vocalist a rhythm to play off of, etc., 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 which seems like something that you would get high and think about for a long time. But when you're in a session where it's like, hey, we got lunch at 1, that's a thought you have to have, and a conclusion you have to come to in like 30 seconds, if you have that much time. So that's how my brain started thinking about, oh, here's the big picture, here's how a song works, here's how everything like that. So when it comes to, I start working with like bands or on like long record projects, or working with producers that are a little more collaborative on different records, then it's just like you just start taking notes, just like watching everything, maybe staying for a couple hours after the session and like watching the mix down, or watching the rough mix, or how they coil cables or whatever it is. And then at a certain point you're like, oh yeah, I can do that. So
obviously you're sort of thrown into an environment that most people don't get thrown into.
That's
on
very
average.
true. Yeah.
So because I'm thinking about these guys.
Yeah.
Here in Savannah, Georgia, in a school, how would you break that down for like beginner steps?
Okay.
On just like how to sort of assemble something, to produce something when you don't really know very much yet, but you need some anchors to sort of assemble something.
So if we're saying like we're gonna make a song, right, or you're gonna produce a track, and by track I mean a song. What do you want it to sound like? Like, what's in your head? Like, what do the drums sound like? Are there drums? What does the bass sound like? Is it a keyed bass? Is it a bass guitar? Is it upright bass? Whatever. So you need to kind of have that vision in your head. And then you need to be like, okay, well, if I want the drums to sound like this song, then go listen to that song and really focus on the drum sounds. Earlier today, there was a guy in here we were talking about. He's got a really small home recording rig, and he's trying to figure out the best way to record drums, and he's only got 2 inputs on his interface. It's like, well, we're just kind of like spitballing ideas, and like he's like, well, I mean, I guess because there's a 3 mic setup for drum recording that's really cool and it sounds really neat, but like the 2 mics are kind of limited. So we just eventually kind of came to is like, oh, well, with this particular microphone that he has, I showed him is like, if you put it this far away from the kit at this height, aimed at the snare drum, you can just use 1 mic and it'll sound like old school Motown. Like that'll be pretty close. So I would say, so that's a thing. He's like, oh, well, that's kind of the sound I was going for anyway. It's like, well, perfect. Okay, try that. Move it around until it sounds right, you know. But it's like finding the sounds you want and that are in your head. And then to start out with, just like, man, basically just copy what's going on already. Like, rip people off. That's the only way any of this happens. And it's like, whether it's songwriting or production or anything like that, it's just like, there is nothing I do in here that is like unique to me. It is not unique to the Icelandic composers that I am ripping off when I do scoring. It's not unique to the people they ripped off. It's just like, because it's all an evolution thing. It's like, I'm not gonna be, if you guys, you know, if you get a 4-track Tascam tape machine and you're like, I'm gonna just record a bunch of Americana songs like Bruce Springsteen, you're not gonna make a Bruce Springsteen record because you're not Bruce Springsteen, right? I don't think anyone is, anyway. But like, anyway, so all that being said, so breaking it down, just like, it's figuring out the sounds you want and then just building from there. Like, you have to know what you want to do. You have to be, I think there needs to be intention before you start really building something. It's not to say you can't get on, like, you know, Logic or Apple Loops and start and just fuck around until you find something cool. Like, I don't know if you guys, like, check out, like, pay attention to, like, Dead Mouse or anything like that. But, like, that's basically the only way he ever comes up with anything. It's just, like, no, it's not even that. It's like he's got a wall of sense. So he'll just get, like, he'll get stoned at, like, midnight. And then about 3:30 in the morning, he'll have found some patch that he likes. And he's like, oh, that's cool. And then he'll just build off of that. And it'll be like, that's the hook, right? Or that's the rhythm. And then we just build off of that. So, like, that can be a thing. And that's stuff, I've done stuff like that too. But if you're talking about, like, a pop track, and by pop, I mean just, like, something that is catchy, that people are going to want to listen to, you know, whatever the genre, it's just like, what's the big picture I'm hearing in my head? And then how can we just break that down into individual pieces?
Excellent. Yeah. Maybe this is a good time for a couple of questions or anything you might want to ask around anything we've done so far. Whatever it is. Anybody have a question or a thought? Yeah. Drew.
I gotta think how to word this. What's your typical, like, recording session look like?
Okay.
With let's say a band.
Okay. Well, typical is a weird word because it's just a lot of different things coming in. But if we're doing like if it's like a traditional rock band setup, you know, so like bass, drums, guitar kind of thing. Depending on the band or artist, I may or may not be playing guitar or bass, you know, depending on, and then some of that comes down to budget. But usually, so like the drums will be mic'd up to some variety, you know, depending on what the sound is we're going for. It'll be drums just stay there. That's the kind of little corner. It works really well. And there'll be like that mic stand will have like overhead mics and like usually an XY pattern or whatever. And then Bass 90% of the time going DI. I might track the amp simultaneously, but most of the time it's just DI. It's like, works for James Jamerson. Doesn't like, who am I to question that. Guitar, there's an amp in that, so that door with the chalkboard, that's that's like an isolation booth. So there'll be an amp or a speaker cabinet in there. So sometimes there's an amp sitting on the desk, sometimes it's all the way in there, sometimes it's running out to a cabinet. I've got a long speaker cable. And then the vocalist, if they're playing acoustic or electric guitar, I'll put them kind of a little further back than where Ron's sitting, and we'll just throw a little 58, some sort of dynamic mic in front of them. And there's that gobo sort of movable wall back here next to the mic locker. I'll just kind of put that around to where it doesn't get, so their mic won't be getting a lot of cymbal noise, and the overheads won't be getting a lot of vocal noise. Like, you'll get a little bit of bleed, and you'll get some ghosting from the overheads at some point, but like, as long as we're doing the same song, we know what the melody's gonna be, it's not gonna be that big of a problem later on when we get the mixing. Okay. So we'll just track everything live. We'll do about 3 or 4 takes until we get a good like drum and bass feel, and then from there just kind of build it up. That's kind of the foundation for everything. Try to get it as live as possible. We have done full on like live recording stuff in here, which has been pretty cool. Got to keep it fairly low volume so everybody can listen to each other, but it's been that's been pretty cool. I would love to do more of that. As you can see, there's not like a control room or like an ISO booth situation really here. It just kind of depends on the situation. Like, then there's been other times where it's like, it's just me doing everything. So if that's the case, I will set up a microphone to record acoustic guitar or whatever the first instrument needs to be. Just give me some sort of reference. Then I'll go record drums, record bass, record electric, piano, whatever needs to happen. It's a variety. Just depends on what the situation is.
Sweet.
Have you ever had a manager or a manager approach you to represent you?
Yeah, there's nothing to manage yet, though, right?
Yeah.
So.
No. Well, we talk about this.
Oh, we talk about.
We talk about it in reference, especially to a young class that are sophomores, give or take. Their first manager will be themselves.
Yeah, I have never had a manager. If things go the way it seems, if my sleep schedule is any indication of what my future holds in the next few years, there might be a conversation like the end of this year or next year with like a firm out in LA that like I know them really well, and they manage a couple of bands that I like, and a couple of producers that I like. But man, there's no need to have a manager, whether you are an artist, whether you are a producer, whether you are just an engineer, whatever it is. There's no need for management until stuff really starts falling through the cracks. Like, if you wake up one day and you're like, I've only slept 3 hours this week and I have no idea who owes me what and what my next day is like, then you probably need some help. But that even might just be an assistant, rather than like depending, it just kind of depends on what you guys are doing. But like, if you're doing, let's say if you're like a singer-songwriter and you're playing at restaurants and you're getting $300 a gig, and someone comes up to you and says, hey, I want to be your manager, don't return their phone call. It's just like, what are they managing?
They're mostly just going to take
a chunk of
your money.
They're going to take $30 from you every gig, and just like, it's like, there's no, and like, I don't know, granted, I grew up in the industry, I am jaded from the womb, but it's also just like, it's the reality of the situation. You're just like, especially now, it's just like, hey man, I don't like spending time, like, I don't get on Facebook and Instagram to promote stuff, and that is kind of a bad idea in the current economic climate we live in, but it's just like, I don't like it, so I have someone that helps me with it sometimes, but like, it's not,
And how do you determine your fees for the various ways you interact, meaning you're going to be sideman on guitar, you're going to be in a session, you're going to produce the song for a movie.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know market value? How do you know your value?
Do I know my value? I don't know. I mean, when I'm producing stuff, it's actually way easier because I kind of know about how much time I'm gonna spend on the song. Then, like, depending on like, I can be like, okay, this is my rate for one song, producing one song, and that will cover, you know, up to the mixing process. If I mix it, that might be a different fee or like a different thing. When it comes to like playing a gig with someone, you know, if it's like a bar gig and playing a 30-minute slot with somebody around town or whatever, it's just kind of like, I sometimes don't even ask what it pays because most of the time it doesn't. And if I get $50, I'm like, and some free drinks, which, you know, not that I'm advocating for drinking, but sometimes I'm just kind of like, it's like, oh, all right, cool, that was fun, you know. And it's like, when a lot of the people I play with now, they don't, this is gonna sound really egomaniacal. I don't like rehearsing if we're doing the songs like the record, right? If you're doing a cover gig or right, whatever, and it's just like, hey, we're doing these songs like cover, I was like, I'm not coming to your rehearsal if we're doing them like the record. If you have like some weird arrangements that like haven't been recorded and we need to like really focus on parts and stuff like that, sure, fine. Or if it's like a tribute show or something like that, and we're like, no, we're really gonna do this record like front to back, we're gonna get in the weeds. Yes, but then you're also going to be paying me more than the $50 and 2 beers, you know. So just really depends on, because it's like it makes. I'll give you a good, for instance, about like time wasting and avoiding your time being wasted. There was a artist recently who the question was, asked me, "Do you have a sitar or any sort of weird, you know, sort of Asian style instruments?" I was like, I do. There's a Japanese harp right over there. It's Kodo underneath the red. I have a lot of weird instruments and like sitting just floating around in drawers and stuff. I was like, yeah, I could do that. And the question was, oh, well, do you think sometime you might want to come by our studio and like maybe do some recording? And it's like, that's not a question. And this is like, if I'm gonna like preach anything, it's like, be specific with your like communication when it comes to like artists, clients, whatever it is, and demand specificity or require specificity from people trying to hire you. What are you asking? Do I want to come maybe sometime record some things at some, like, okay, so do you want me to, because if I show up to a recording session, like whenever I have to go to Nashville or like LA or New York and record with anybody, I'm bringing minimum 4 guitars. I'm going to bring a rather large pedal board if I'm driving myself or it's being freighted. There's going to be 3 or 4 amps coming, or I'm going to backline stuff, use stuff. There's a lot of gear that I have to haul to something. So if you're like asking me, oh, hey, you want to come maybe record a thing? It's like, okay, well, how much stuff am I going to take upstairs to your studio without any help, without any, like, you know, I know there's no intern there to schlep stuff up, whatever. And then what are you exactly you're asking? Can you send me the track and I can just record it here where I have all the microphones, all of the instruments or whatever, you know, that kind of thing. So it's just like, and there was never and I was like, well, you could just send me the track and I could just track it at home. And that was the end of the conversation because it wasn't like a serious, like, you know, whatever. When you're making it your job or your career, you kind of have to get away in some ways from the whole notion of it's all about the art, because at some point, until there's a viable alternative to the capitalist system we live in, you kind of have to treat it like a job, because it is your job. So you can't have people just wasting your time because that's money you're not making, you know. And like I'm at the point now, it's like I have been very fortunate as like in the career I've had. I'm very blessed to have been on some really cool records and like have a bit of a resume that like keeps me busy, that I can say no to a lot of stuff and not have a second thought about it. That like where you guys are right now, there's stuff I can say no to that you can't say no to if you want to work in 20 years. and I'm not saying that as like, look at me, but just like, that's just like the reality of the situation. So it's like, if I don't want to go do your $50 bar gig, I'm just not going to go do the $50 bar gig. But I don't have, I don't have to now, because I've worked 20 plus years to be able to do it, or if I want. So yeah, it's just don't let anyone take advantage of you. But also, it's that weird double-edged sword where it's just like, when you're getting started, it's just like, sometimes you just gotta go do the fucking $100 a day sweeping up the studio and picking up cigarettes at the corner store for folks gig, because that's just how you get in your foot in the door, man.
Like, do those jobs while $100 is still a lot to us. Like,
yeah.
Like, even though like $100 isn't much right now, but to us who don't have as many bills, who don't have a house to pay,
totally.
like, take those jobs now until
I've got
you can turn those away.
There's a young friend of ours that's like on tour right now. Hi, that's my wife.
Oh, yeah.
No, there's a young artist, friend of ours who is on the road doing merch sales for a band, and like what she's getting paid. When she told me what she was getting paid, I lost my shit. I was like, I called the manager of that band, or I called the business manager. I was like, explain to me what. And I was like, I'm looking at the venues this band is playing. Like, I know approximately what their guarantees are, and I know what they're pulling. It was like, all these things that like I'm just like, I've been in this industry a long time. It's like, and this is what you're doing, but it's like, she's 24. She is like lives with her sister when she's in town. She's got no car payment, she's got no mortgage. It's just that kind of thing where it's just like, well, yeah, do that while you can, because it helps build the network of people you know.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, whenever it's like, there will be a moment where you're like, oh, hey, well, I basically wrote that verse in that song and I'm not getting any credit for it, and that album just got a Grammy nomination. All right, let's let that be the last time that happens. Yeah. And then, you just gotta stick up for yourself. And
Are you connected at all to any publishing houses, BMI and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been with my uncle was the VP of BMI for a long time. So I can't leave that company, because pretty sure. But I've got all my stuff is registered with them. I don't really work with any publishers consistently. There's a couple of labels in Nashville that I work with every once in a while, and just depends on do like some projects for them.
Well, maybe you can explain to them. I mean, yes, you have an uncle, and we were talking about connections.
Nepotism.
But let's say everyone wrote one song and it's pretty good. They think it's pretty good, and it's not even out. Nothing happened. But they want to sort of secure some ownership over that and secure that.
Okay.
Maybe
all right.
you can speak
so
to that.
So let's start here. It is free to sign up for a publishing rights organization. And publishing rights organizations are BMI, CSAC, ASCAP.
There they are.
There are very few differences between the three of them now. If you are playing original music at a show, you can register your set list with any of those three, and as long as those compositions, original compositions of yours, have been registered with that PRO, they will send you a little bit of a check, as long as that venue that you played at pays that BMI, CSAC, ASCAP fee, whatever it is. I'm gonna advocate for BMI because it's the family business, but like any of those are fine. It's free to sign up for them, and all you do, there's an app for the BMI one. You can register your composition as like, I wrote a song called, whatever the title is. I wrote the song. Here, you can upload the lyrics. You can say there's music for it. You can upload a recording of it, like a demo recording of it, and you just have it. There are several reasons to do this. The main reason is if you happen to be like a certain friend of mine who wrote a song about a very traumatic event that she witnessed while she was on tour, and she posted a video of it on Instagram. And 3 weeks later, a artist that she had done a co-write with in Nashville, who was much, much, much more well known than she is, sends a demo recording of that song that she re-recorded without permission, without consent from the writer, changed a few words, and proposed a 50% split on the publishing rights. This person has hundreds of thousands of followers on all social media platforms. So if that artist was to release that song as one of their compositions, that is potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars that they would make for changing 2 words in a song. Right. Because my friend had not registered as an artist with these publishing rights organizations, not a lot, like literally not a lot that she could go with. I mean, like there would be, basically you're just like, yeah, you sue that person in Tennessee, you go before a special judge who like deals with songwriting disputes, and they're gonna be like, oh, well, it looks like this Instagram video was posted 3 weeks before you recorded this demo, so like clearly you're in the wrong, so fuck off. But it's like, yeah, immediately, like I was in an airport and she called me and was like freaking out about it. And it was just like, yeah, it's just, it covers your butt. But if there is ever anything, like, dude, little stuff that I write here, that just like little 15-song jingles for like YouTube theme songs or whatever. She's like, all that shit. Just go ahead and register it, because it's like you might come back to it. You might 10 years from now and be like, oh, it was a really cool thing, and then it's like it's already there, it's registered, whatever. Or if you put it on, if you got a SoundCloud going on, and someone's like, I really like that riff. And then they sample it and another piece, and that ends up being a thing. It's just like, well, yeah, you can say it was on SoundCloud, but it's like it's not legally covered. Like it's just that having it with a PRO, it makes it a little more bulletproof. And then if you can say to like, no, here is the publishing number on that song. Here's my writer's publisher number. Those publishing rights companies, what they have that you don't have, an army of attorneys. And it's kind of like being in the musicians union or something like that. It's just like, yeah, it sucks to pay dues, and sometimes you're like, why am I in it? But it's like somebody screws you over, and they're in violation of a union contract. Those guys, the union will be able to afford attorneys that you can't afford.
And I'll add, you may not even know you're going to write music yet. You wrote a little music, and the reality is, we talk about a vision for your future, to be able to see something, and just in the act of, let's say, going with BMI, which actually is really pretty much
Big fan.
They're good. So that little bit of exercise is saying something about you and your intentions. I was listening to Herbie Hancock, the piano player, talk the other day, and he. When he first got his first record deal with Blue Note, and everybody's like 20-something in this time, right? Mm-hmm. Herbie's 20, and he has a record deal with Blue Note, and Blue Note is just going, they know he doesn't know much, and they just want him to bring the songs that he's making on that record right over to Blue Note, mm-hmm. So Blue Note owns it, mm-hmm. And a trumpet player named Donald Byrd said, Herbie, don't do that, man. Keep your own publishing.
Yeah.
And
he's like, what's publishing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And so, although Herbie has written all kinds of music and has played unbelievable stuff, he smiled and he said, he wrote a tune called Watermelon Man.
I do know this
and
song.
That tune, because he owns it and has been covered by thousands of musicians, just putting it on the record and their interpretation of it. He's completely a millionaire on just the one song.
Yeah. The inverse of that story is, you guys know the Patsy Cline song "Crazy"?
Yeah.
Willie Nelson wrote that, and he sold it to Patsy Cline's manager for $400.
Yeah.
How nice.
So, the idea, again, is there's a wonderful combination of just having a bit of a hopeful vision, because, all kinds of things. This is the arts. In the arts, you don't know which horse is coming in first.
Yeah, that's true.
You can't know that. You just have a moment in a fraction of a second. You post a little something, and in the moment of that eclipse.
Yeah, and I think, and that's the thing. It's just like, it's not even so much like, you know, if you sign up for when you sign up for a PRO, it's not the same as like having a publishing deal. Like that doesn't mean that you're gonna have an advocate at that company being like, we're gonna get your songs on the TV. It's like that. It doesn't come with the rich and famous contract.
Right.
If you guys have seen Muppets Take Manhattan, doesn't come with that. But it's just like it's a good first step. And like, yeah, I mean, you may never, I don't know, you guys don't write music. It's like you don't need it, but it's like it's a good first step. You're a writer. It says to you, and it says in that way. And if you've got any questions, like I can't speak to like ASCAP or CSAC, but it's like I can speak to BMI. It's like if you got any questions, man, you can just fire off an email. It's totally, and like they'll answer your questions. If you need help with like registering, like I was having some trouble a few years ago, getting co-writer shares on a few tunes that I had like produced and written, or they're like basically like, dude, really couldn't afford to pay for the record, so it was just like, let's just do 50% co-writer, you know, whatever. It's like, yeah, sure, fine. And it was like, because I don't have I'm not with a label and with a specific publishing company, there's like a certain registration numbers that some PROs have that other PROs, it was like, when you have, it's like having a Mac trying to talk to a PC at some point, it's kind of a thing, but it's like, oh, hey, here's my rep at BMI, just talk to them, I don't have to deal with it. It's like, you know, they'll handle it, whatever. So it's like, and it's just good because then you're at that point you're in the system. So it's not like you're an unknown entity where you're like completely drowning if you're like trying to tread water if you find yourself in a tricky situation.
I'm going to just backstep on a question, ask it in a slightly different way just for these guys. And that is, when they're trying to make some decision about their value, and that's all relative, but there is a market value. For example, we might know that in that scenario, a producer who's going to do 11 songs on a record and they got a label, well, that's one number I'm going to get paid. But you know, not everybody knows the market value of like the $50 gig either.
Yeah,
you know,
that's true.
And how was it through word of mouth, or you knew, hey, how much should I ask for this? I mean, because there's a little of that too. You know, you're just saying like, you know, even if you show up, you go, how much are you getting paid?
Right. Yeah.
You know.
Well, I think so I do think this is a huge problem with not just the music business, but like the entire entertainment industry, period, and just generally, it's the thing. And without getting like super into like, you know, lefty pro-union, pro-labor politics, the people that make the most money off of the music industry, they love that we're having to have a conversation like, well, how much do you charge for your thing? Because it keeps them rich and it keeps us going, I don't know, like, how much should I charge this? 100, 1,000? I don't know. Because it's like, it is such an unknown entity because there is no, it's like, man, if you're making a record, all right, I'll give you a real world, for instance, example. The first record I produced was for a friend of mine, and we were like, she was really wanting to make a new album, and she hadn't made one in like 5 years, and like she was doing a lot of gigs, and she had no money because she was doing like a lot of like restaurant cover gigs or whatever. And I was like, I've got like 5 microphones and kind of an idea, maybe I can do this. So like, I was like, she's like, well, how much would you need to charge? And I was like, I have no clue because I'm basically, you're taking a gamble on me doing it, right? And it was like, you know, I had literally like 2 inputs that I could use, like 2 microphones at one time, right? And for the entire 7-song record or whatever, I was like, oh, like $1,200, okay? And she was like, yeah, that's it. Okay, cool, it's killer deal. Now, it took us a long time to do it because I had no idea what I was doing, and she kind of knew what she was doing, but like we were just all trying stuff out all the time and trying to figure out, okay, how can we use the limited resources we have to like make the thing. But it was like, so it took us a while, but it worked out, and it was like generally a positive experience overall. Okay, now I got a call from a major label recently to book out the studio for a day for an artist that they had. Again, I know just say it was within Universal Music Group. So what, 40% of the market share worldwide of the music industry? Okay. This was in November. They did an 12-hour session. And I cut them a little bit of a deal. I was like, because it's like they didn't need me to engineer. They really just needed the room and my speakers. So like everything was just like engineer, buddy of mine from Atlanta, brought in his own laptop, brought in his own interface, and they were just tracking. They used some mics, but really they were just kind of tracking some vocals for some stuff that had already been recorded. So they just kind of hung out, for a few hours, whatever. I charged $500. The label has made me register as a vendor inside their integral payment system, and then I had to submit a sample invoice so that they know what my invoices look like. Then whenever I got approved of all of that, which took 6 weeks, I then had to submit an actual invoice, and then they're like, oh hey, your tax forms are past the window of when we need them to be within the date range, so we need new tax forms from you. Which is like, they were up to date when I first sent them in, whatever. Anyway, bureaucracy, fine. So finally, last week, it was like November, mind you. Finally, last week, everything gets submitted, and they're like, cool. Now it's in the approval process, and we'll be cutting you a check at some point. $500.
At some point.
And now I have to wait up to 3 months to get paid for one session for $500 in November from Universal Music Group. Okay, so my point is, that's typical. Like, nothing I said right now, Ron and I know each other's backgrounds in the industry. Nothing I said right now surprised Ron 1 second. Like, it's like, so that's a thing that was like, that is a thing that happens all the time. So when you are it really depends on when you're trying to determine your value and what you should charge for a thing. I think there are several factors to take into consideration. The amount of time you're going to spend on a thing, but then secondarily, and a very close second, what is the experience going to be for you? And what are you going to get out of it outside of the money? And then what can that person, that artist, that label actually afford? I'll give you another, for instance, if you will stop recording.